I found these fun shapes at a place called Mr. Plywood here in Portland, Oregon, and I picked up a few. I decided I was going to try and do something interesting with them. So I thought you might like to follow along and see what happens. What I'm going to coat them with first is something called Venetian plaster. And I use this instead of acrylic gesso. It's less expensive, works just as well, and it's easy to get. It's a Behr brand, and you can get it at Home Depot or anywhere I'm sure that they carry Behr. So, and you might notice I have this ragtag piece of paper under here. I like to reuse paper as much as possible. Sometimes I'll use some of these papers to put over an encaustic monotype before I brayer it. And then when they get too messy, I just throw them away. But I really like reusing them. So anyway, we will start with this and see where it goes. I've found the easiest way is this two-step process to put on this Venetian plaster. First, I use a palette knife and just sort of spread it around a bit. And then use a fairly stiff brush to then smooth it out. You want to do a fairly thin coat. I usually do 2 or 3 coats, sanding in between, but you don't even really need to sand unless there's a lot of things sticking out, because as you well know, wax likes a nice texture to grab a hold of. So that's that, and we just keep applying it with the palette knife. As this Venetian, this is a brand new can, as it sits around, it tends to get a little bit thicker, makes it a little bit hard to get around on the board, but I usually use the whole can up unless it sits for too long, and then sometimes I have to throw away some of the leftover on the bottom, but usually not too much. So you can sort of see how that goes on. Try and smooth it down a little bit as much as I can. One more spot here. Just put a little here. So we just let that dry. I usually let it dry each coat overnight, just to make sure it's dry. But you can use a hair dryer to dry it faster, or sit it out in the sun. There we go. Here's a larger piece, and I just wanted to show you that I've taped off the edges with the blue tape. And for spreading out a larger piece, I use something a little bit wider. You can use, you can also use a tile, large tile thing piece as well. So again, I'm just going to spread it over the piece, and I don't want it to dry too much before I get to the brush, so I'll probably just do half of it here, making sure there's enough to spread around with the brush. Okay, and then we'll just spread around. It helps if you wet your brush with water first too before trying to spread it with a dry brush. It just helps it move around a little bit better. So you can see that goes on pretty easily. Now what I do try to do is smooth it out as much as possible so I don't have any lumps. And sometimes you can do that actually with the piece here. Just sort of go over the top of it a little bit. Oops, I got something in there. Now I got a piece of something. Just sort of get any big lumps out, and then I can go back with the brush. And a back and forth in both directions helps as well. And then I try and make sure I've pulled it out to the edges. People do different things with the edges. I tend to leave mine in the natural wood. But I've also painted it with acrylic, painted them with acrylic, stained them. And then sometimes I actually put pieces in a frame, in a floater frame. Especially if the piece is an inch or under width, depth I should say, to give it a little more stability. And so now we just go over it with the brush, spreading it out. Now remember, we're going to give it 2 or 3 coats, sanding in between each one. So I'll just put a little more product here. So I have enough to spread around. Now this usually will dry depending on how thick it is. I actually like to let them dry overnight. But if I'm in a hurry, I can use a hair dryer or put them out in the sun, or wait, 3 or 4 hours, come back, do it in the morning, come back in the afternoon. It's usually dry before I put on the second coat. I get those edges there, and then I try and take it off. Anything that's lapping over, that can be sanded off as well, but if you get the bulk of it off, it's a little easier. And you can see it spreads pretty well. It's just making sure you get all the places covered. And again, you're going to go over it again, so if there's a spot that you missed, don't worry about it. All right, so now we'll just let that dry.